and welcome to yet another episode of Dashley Digest. You're joined by me, Victoria, and then there is also Tom. Tom, say hi.
Hello, hi.
There we are. And Nicolas, who you may remember from last time.
Hello.
And then we're joined today by the fantastic Alexandra from Behave. Now, I could probably never do as much justice as Alexandra could do for herself. Alexandra, would you mind giving a couple of words to the lovely podcast listeners on exactly who you are and what you do and why you wow the world?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Alexandra from Behave. We're part of Serviceplan Group, and I look after innovation and strategy, having spent all my career into corporate strategy and innovation and behavioral science.
Very cool. Right, now, without further ado, I think it's always best to just jump straight into things. You were just talking about something wonderful just there, which was all about, I think the words you said were efficiency versus excellence. Would you mind just starting the conversation and talking a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So what I find often when we talk to C-suites and boards is that they want to implement AI, but with the aim of making sure that the company operates in a more efficient way. But efficiency stops here, so very close to you, whereas excellence is really something that allows you to become a better version of the organization you used to be. And so in all these conversations, what is being misunderstood is that AI can really be a conduit for achieving excellence. But achieving excellence requires a different sort of manual, if you want, being at ease with ambiguity, being at ease with not really knowing where you land. And that is something that goes counter how most organizations operate, based on KPIs that are often artificial, etc.
Yeah, I would like to jump in there and really, give a grand applause to that distinction, because I think there's an obsession with efficiency in organizations. And I just recently were talking on LinkedIn about exactly that, and saying, as much as efficiency being the convenience paved road to obsolescence, but rather than just generally bashing efficiency and saying, okay, there's definitely less of that we need in large organizations, and excellence is a great shout. I would like to go in and find out, like, how can we make a deliberate choice when efficiency is needed and when we should do something else. And I think, yes, efficiency is a great thing for routine tasks, right? Like, I mean, they should be efficient. I mean, recently, Nicolas and I have been having the pleasure to go on a visit of the factory of BMW in Munich. So we have seen, obviously, lots and lots of very efficient processes, and rightly so, they should be efficient. But in the same vein, if you keep all those processes the same way for decades, you're stuck. You get stuck with innovation. Nothing new is going to happen. So I think you need to have a balance between doing some things very efficient, but then using that remaining time to do something new, to hone your skills, to learn something new, to develop innovative new practice. And that requires energy, that requires a different skill. And I think organizations are really bad at changing gears, to kind of think in different modalities, to kind of like be adaptive. So in that way, I would like to introduce a term I call liquid organization, because I see, like, for many, many years, or for decades, we had this model where, business as usual. You run something and it just works, so you don't change it. But if you have to change it, Kurt Lewin comes to mind, the unfreeze, change, freeze model, right? Like, where you something that has been fixed and has been working, you need to kind of like unfreeze it because it's frozen. So people's minds are frozen because you don't expect people to think. And then you ask them to change it and they need to learn something new, but then you freeze it again because people need to be staying almost like in a mental stasis to continue to operate like machines. And I think we are past this model. and we need to think about a new model for organizations.
Yeah, perhaps to add what you're briefly already touching, like the organizational layer, I think especially when we talk about companies in Europe, we're very detected to where we earn money now. And this reflects, of course, what you say, Alexandra, being in this efficiency or walking this efficiency trail. And this trail is really, everybody's walking through this trail. So I'm always thinking something which is very old, but I think whether it's invented by Google or McKinsey, those 3 horizon phases they came up with already like years ago when we were like in this innovation cycle and all the innovation models everybody came up with. And referring to this, especially Europe is in this phase 1 still stuck. So we are not really using innovation, but we are, like you said, we're using AI for existing processes, trying to optimize it, and then we are automatically in the trail of efficiency, but we are not really looking, because of this, keeping this EBIT and money saved for the next 12 months, trying to track our budget down as we've committed it to, but we're not thinking beyond. And I think when talking about AI, we have to stop thinking linear. And for nowadays, we don't know what non-linear thinking is. There's no definition, or at least I don't know a definition, but we have to be more open-minded in terms of, after online, there was mobile, and before that, after analog, there's digital, and we have to stop thinking of these kind of traditional way of organizing things, but to dig deep. And I think now there's an AI answer which couldn't be answered within 5 minutes for a German-speaking CEO, or also, of course, English-speaking. But I think beyond this, and we have to go through this kind of barrier, there's hopefully the answer of how to implement AI within European companies in the future.
I think that's a really interesting one, actually. I'd like to pick up, thankfully, obviously, on everything all of you have said. But firstly, I think, Nicolas, of your point about sort of tradition, I've recently been working with someone on sort of a new, an augmented reality sort of AI forward art project. And it's funny because she's trying to build a luxury brand. And I've sat there thinking to myself, what is luxury? What is luxury in the modern age? And so it's funny how it's very much about paying homage to what has been, creating that sense of history, I guess. So having something that is almost timeless and that's come through, but that can also evolve. And so I sit there and think, I wish that organizations, more of them perhaps, would look to something as, just because it has always been this way, doesn't mean it must stay. Now, I'm not necessarily stating that anyone should do a Jaguar approach and release the 00 concept thing, which had mixed reviews, but I think that there's definitely a way to stay true to who you are. But I think that really requires organizations knowing who they are. And I think it also requires people knowing who they are. And this makes me think, Alexandra, of something that we spoke about last week, which is kind of, in the age of AI, is it also like a self-exploratory tool as well? Is one of the reasons why we feel so intimidated by it, because it now, and Tom as well, and all of you, this is built on everything we've been saying, it kind of, what you can do with it relies on you knowing yourself, and not being intimidated by it is also dependent upon one being able to see one's own value beyond the processes of what they do every single day. So I think that's just, I mean, it's quite a big question, obviously, but like, where does I don't know, where does the sort of like working world sit within that in terms of knowing oneself? Have you experienced many organizations which you felt are sort of, I don't want to say flailing blindly, but maybe like flailing blindly in this sort of current world, and just seemingly sort of lacking any real sense of purpose? What do you think?
I think that certainly from a sort of cultural point of view, most organizations do lack a real culture of psychological safety, in the sense of how we define it, that behave, a sense of humility, examination, and then real disagreement. And that is partly because we have been trained since school or university to, put forth our expertise and to sell ourselves. But that goes counter that humility that allows for curiosity and that allows to go towards AI in a way that enables you to work with it rather than to work on top of it or against it. I think that it was you, Victoria, who said last time we spoke that you've seen people who actually really do try to sabotage AI in order to show that it. And to me, it makes little sense in terms of rational thinking. But certainly, if you think that your professional identity is at threat because of AI, then yes, I can understand why you'd sabotage it. But ultimately, it comes to what culture organizations should really try to foster.
I think I would like to add to that in terms of the psychology behind the culture, which I have noticed in many, many large organizations, is one of fear. So people, they act not because they are passionate about something, that they want to further the benefit of the organization, that they want to innovate. In most cases, they want to avoid punishment. They want to avoid being seen as doing something wrong, and advancing often means just being in the favors of someone important. Like, the organization is hugely political. Like, there are people with a lot of power, and you don't want to disappoint them. You don't want to be seen as doing something wrong. And I was really lucky that one of my first jobs was with some ex-McKinsey guys, and they introduced this concept of constructive conflict. So they said, like, everything that is a problem needs to be voiced, needs to be raised. If something doesn't work, or if you think something is wrong, you need to say it. And it's your obligation to say it, because only if we can work through that conflict constructively, we can get better as an organization. And obviously there should never be any punishment to that, right? Because the problem is there whether you say it or not. So yeah, you might as well talk about it. But that brings me to another thing, which is obviously behind a lot of organizations and behind the obsession with efficiency and kind of superficial metrics and KPIs, I think is that fear that also stifles thinking, and that kind of stifles the idea of what is actually value. How do we increase value for an organization in times of AI? And I remember a much appreciated colleague of mine who works in a very, very big bank in an AI risk controlling manner, risk analysis job. And he said there's only 3 types of value. There is cost reduction, risk reduction, and efficiency increase. And I think that's a reductionist view of what value actually could be. And that happens because you cut off an empathetic view of your customers. Because if you actually understand your customers, there would be so many more ways to add value. But obviously that would require you to be vulnerable, to be open, and to out yourself as someone who is empathetic. And because that makes you vulnerable, people don't do it.
And also that definition is a bit tautological, because all of these overlap, so they're not even distinct. But well,
of course,
What came to my mind, that it sounds very statistical, right? And in the end, all these decisions are very individually based. But coming back to this culture thing, I think now what at least from my point of view on the work that I'm in with medium-sized companies, that people are confused or mistaking tradition with culture. In the terms that trying, of course, to find the tradition, which they know what's going to happen. It feels more safe, of course. And culture isn't the same. And culture could be also innovation, which of course means that we are open for for changes and whatever. And I think there's an somehow kind of an interference, but on the wrong side in terms of what company trying to provoke in terms of their own brand. So brand strategy outside, thinking outside in, but on the other hand side, the behavior within the company as their internal brand behavior is much more traditional towards what it's going to change. And of course, related to the fact, of course, what should I rely on, what I don't know? Okay, but still it's a process. And I think we have to leave, especially in Europe, the way of thinking that, I mean, I grew up in the time where we said that knowledge is false, knowledge is everything. And now we just moving forward, we have to think it's not only more about knowledge, it's about adoption. So also kind of a currency, not talking about KPI, is the speed of adoption. And nowadays, if we have like ISO and whatever certifications, there is no adoption. There's no space for adoption because then it's not ISO certificated anymore. And we really have to break this kind of barrier because this keeps us away from being more innovative.
Do you know what? As you were saying that, Nicolas, I was sort of thinking to myself as well, that idea of tradition and culture, but it's also just established, isn't it? It's established norms that are almost masquerading as maybe tradition or culture. And it's like they can be so deeply toxic. It's kind of like, so I went to an all-girls school when I was growing up. And I mean, it was fine, had a nice time, but girls in their teenage years in an all-girls school can be, I felt terrible for the teachers, but bitches, to be quite frank. And it's like, just because like this is almost like the accepted way of behavior. Oh, you go to a girls' school, the teachers just kind of have to suck it up. You know, these kids are paying, they're going to be little so-and-sos sometimes, deal with it. And it's like, no, actually, no, it's not. And I think that there needs to be, perhaps, maybe at the moment there's kind of, we're feeling too trapped in this idea of, and it's a bit like deviating from the norm. It's like, maybe I want to be anomalous. Maybe I want to exist as a fringe person, but without the negative connotations of being a complete lunatic, you know? And it's kind of like, I can have open thoughts and I can think differently and be an outlier, but then I can still also coexist in this same world. And perhaps if we start embedding more of these sort of outlier principles, or at least hearing them out, that would allow for a culture of more sort of innovative thinking, where it's not dubbed outside the box, because outside the box means you've got a box. Why have we got a box? I don't want a box, you know. I'm just going to keep saying box now, but I just think that there's so many ways that we can sort of not just incentivize. I think people have thousands of thoughts every day, don't they? And I wonder if sometimes we're almost too in our own head as to thinking what's going to happen if I say this out loud, rather than thinking, what if I do just say it and see how the world responds within reason, obviously nothing too terrible. And then just going from there, and someone might go, actually, I've thought that too. Maybe we should give it a try. Like if someone told their manager that, you know, oh, I wondered about this. What do you think? And the manager went, try it, you know. How do we think that, are there many organizations that we think that people have worked with here that have sort of embedded that culture? Do you think it would work? I mean, all of these questions are facing through my mind. Alexandra, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It goes back to Tom's point about the culture of fear that tends to prevail in most organizations. And associated with this culture of fear is also, I think that especially in Europe, but not only, we are living in an audit society. We audit everything, including behaviors, but that means that risk-taking has been completely put aside. And then we also seem increasingly to be reductionists, in the sense that there was a time when it was absolutely possible to hold two dividing views at the same time and accept that both can be the truth. It's called a paradox. But currently we only move into wanting the truth and the most simple one. And this is why we end up with very reductionist models of how organizations should operate. We also transfer it into very reductionist models of how AI should help us. And I think it is really on that thought process about how can we embrace again real diversity of thought in the sense of ideas that might not immediately be matching but can be held together. And this is something that we should learn from school already, but we are no longer doing it.
I totally agree. And a couple of years ago, I was talking about that on stage with regard to the epistemological problems of AI, because they're not technical. They're exactly to the point that you just said about the reductionist way of thinking. In a way, what AI is doing, it's collapsing the complexity of our real world into a flat output that suggests that there is one answer and one correct answer to any question, which obviously is ridiculous, right? Like, as you said, it's much more likely that there is, when it comes to real complexity, that there is true paradoxes that exist that we have to navigate. And with that comes risk, but you have to learn to embrace risk to be able to navigate this new world. And I think we're not ready for that, because risk, on the flip side, is also a power issue. Big organizations, they're still hierarchical, in many cases more hierarchical than the organizations would admit. Right? They would maybe they would openly talk about everything's okay, tell us what you think, it's all fine. But when it comes to the point of decision making, they mainly ignore what people think, unless it's making some very powerful people money, or it's making key stakeholders money, right? So, and that part is mostly not communicated very clearly. So with that, there comes like also a double standard of like difference between talking and acting. So back to the behavioral point of view, people talk a good game about innovation, but they don't live it, because there is no risk culture, there is no acceptance of risk, and they don't even, it's a double-edged sword, because obviously no one in school ever is being taught to love risk. Like, we're all kind of like being taught to reduce risk. Risk is something bad, but at the same time, anyone who's ever been active in stock markets knows that risk is necessary. A risk is necessary. If you don't take any risk, you can't have any gains, right?
Yeah, but I think that's also something that we need to learn again. And like you said, we somehow we were not educated this way, and like you say, try to avoid risk. And this has to be reset somehow. I'm still stuck with the reduction manner which you touched, and I really have to think about this and also take this out of our conversation today, because do we have to reduce in a certain sense more, or do we have to be there more open-minded to not being too focused in terms of not being innovative, right? Being stuck. And so this is also perhaps, it's not a point that we look at for the time being, but it's more like a journey that we have to go on. And we have to ask this question, like, let's say, once a week, to make sure that we are on the right way that we want to go in terms of setting up our strategy every 2 years, and then it's frozen. So there has to be a certain kind of adaptation. But still, my head is still spinning.
Well, it's funny. It feels often in life, or we try to reduce things to the fact that life is simple. It's basically, we wake up, we have a routine, we have our own processes that we adhere to, and we try not to think about the philosophical side of things, which really it always comes back to, because what is risk? Is risk the same for everyone? No, it's not. It's like, what is the definition of anything? Fundamentally nothing, because it can be what you want it to be. It's just a generally accepted sort of principle or series of words around something. And actually, I wanted to kind of like inject a bit of, well, roll the dice a bit. If all of you, if you could take one risk today, and I say this because I just watched an Instagram video of a guy who I think base jumped off a mountain, but his parachute got ripped. Anyway, it was an entirely voluntary thing to do. May I hasten to add, he is alive, so it's all good. But then I sat there and think, if you could inject, or if you could do one risky thing today, you know, say with your, it doesn't have to be with your career, it can be with anything. But if you were to just go, do you know what, I'm going to drink a can of Red Bull, it's going to give me wings, and I'm going to do something right now. By the way, please sponsor us, Red Bull. No, if you were to do something today and you were just like, okay, I'm going to pull the plug, I've been thinking about this, what would it be and why?
My answer might be disappointing. I'm really not a sporty person, and I was always, even as a child, completely scared of, you know, having a wound or anything. So I want to go into having wings with Red Bull. To me, the risk I would take is much more about freedom, in the sense that, and it touches upon your earlier point, Victoria. We act according to some norms that are shared, and we don't allow ourselves enough freedom. And it will be that freedom that I will try to embrace a bit more, without asking myself, well, is this person thinking that this is foolish or that this is childish or whatever, with caring a bit less about the perceptions of others, especially knowing that most of the time people don't really have time to really judge you. They have bigger fish to fry. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, maybe similar to that. Victoria knows that, you know, recently I've been coping with a loss, and I've been talking about some personal things on LinkedIn, and I realized that a lot of people didn't like that. So they were kind of like responding in a way where like almost being kind of negatively touched in a way, like, why are you talking about this publicly? I don't want to see that, right? And I want to take the risk to be okay with being disliked publicly, that some people are okay to not like me and or not like the stuff that I talk about, and that's fine, because I think there's like a pressure that comes with being liked or wanting to be liked, that you start to censor parts of you and you try to be a version of yourself that is at the end untrue to yourself, and that will erode who you are. So I want to care less, but not in a way that I want to actively piss people off. That's not what I want to do. I just want to not actively try to be someone that I'm not.
Mate, just to say on that one, so look, if I hear what you're saying, I'm sorry that you've been going through that, but also back in the day when we used to throw vegetables at people in stocks and stuff like that, think the person whose head might have been in that thing, who was getting tomatoes and cabbages and stuff like that hurled at them, they were still more important and more relevant than, and braver. Hopefully they didn't do anything too bad, but, you know, braver than the people who were in the crowd, part of the collective, who were there jeering at someone who dared to do something different. Again, hopefully nothing too bad. Otherwise, you know, that's different case. But all I can tell you is on that one as well, on the subject of throwing vegetables, back in 2010, I worked at MySpace for a little bit, and Ozzy Osbourne came in, and we were dealing with a webinar for him. And he told us one story, and this is why I say also about the fame, infamy, whatever relevance. He told me that one of his favorite memories ever was of watching someone on stage, and then while they were on there, someone literally from the audience threw a cabbage at this lead singer on the stage, and it stuck in his mind forever. And he said it just brought me so much joy in that moment that it just collectively, it's just like he sat there and thought, it kind of united everyone. And the guy on the stage grabbed the cabbage and was just like running around with it, parading it around. And so I think that there's, from that, it sounds a bit tenuous, I know, a bit abstract, but, you know, one person's negative moment can be another person's redemption or enjoyment. So I sincerely hope that the experiences that you have there don't leave a lasting negative one from you, and just know that you're saying something that might well be touching a nerve with people, that's possibly echoing something within them that they don't want to talk about themselves, but I don't want to project too hard on them. But yeah, sorry, Nicolas, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, I like what you're saying, and I also like your original question about how to take risk, and what originally came to my mind, and I'm happy that I wasn't the first one to answer the question, is that I had the feeling of how to deal with complexity nowadays, right? And of course, this means having control. And after now hearing to what you were saying already, is that my reflection is more or less to let go, not to control risk. But now when it comes, for example, my kids are both in the age where they're like trying to be on their own. And they're not 18, so there are some rules and restrictions why they cannot, but still being in this educational way, risk-taking for me means to let go and release what I am thinking, and to help them find their own way. And the funny thing is, which also happened this morning, so my son, he's 15, he told it me in a very sophisticated and way where I feel trust to him, even though that he told me something where I was like, what has happened? Taking control, tell him where barriers are and where not. But in the end, this discussion went totally different, because I was just listening, and getting back to my statement, it was more like a risk-taking in terms of educating my son, but it turned out that he knows pretty well what he's doing. So please, for myself, push the release button. And of course, he's in this way also much more connected to me in terms of taking control. So I think with the red ribbon, it's more like risk doesn't mean to take control, but also to let go of something, and in this way taking risk.
It's pretty interesting, and I think that kind of also, if I'm understanding correctly as well, it does echo Alexandra's point as well about that kind of that sense of release, of not in that instance, not perhaps censoring, or at least partially censoring oneself based on what we think other people are thinking about us, but just in that sense of, well, also there can be judgment as well. If someone looks at, they can see a child there, or a teenager rather, and they go, oh, is that parent allowing that to happen? Okay then, and it's just like, oh, cough, but no, I think it's really, really interesting, and I can definitely relate as well to I think all of you, and also the idea, I think, of self-censorship, and I something that I've definitely been trying to do, I think, actually over the past maybe the past 6 months for definite. It's just been, do you know what, like, I actually don't care what someone else thinks of me externally, as long as I sit there and I'm like, I'm not feral, but I have my thoughts and the ways that I articulate myself and the way I sort of present myself, and if someone doesn't vibe with it, that's okay. It's just that they're not imaginative. No, it just means that we just don't vibe on the same level, and that's fine. Not everyone's going to. But what it has done for me, I will say, is it's really allowed me to meet a bunch of people, and I mean yourself included, Nicolas. It's only through knowing Tom, who is his own kind of person. No, I'm kidding, Tom. Obviously I think you're brilliant.
Totally fine.
No, it's only through knowing Tom, and Tom and I have our moments, and we're very fortunate in the sense that we can disagree and we can then come back and talk about it. So I feel very thankful to have him as a friend. But it's only through knowing him that I've got to know other people who are also as sort of open-minded and sort of accepting and just willing to poke and push things. And Alexandra, it's how I met you. It's because Tom came up with this idea of go behave. And so I just think it's amazing how this, without sounding cheesy, almost like this community of those with, I'd say, overlapping maybe values, start to really get to know one another. and be able to hopefully collectively start pushing things together as well. But no, I think my risk would probably be moving maybe to the Galapagos Islands and getting rid of all cellular technology. So not yet, but maybe in 10 years. Yes, that's it. Sorry, I'm conscious of the fact I've just whittled on. Was there anything else anyone would like to say at all before we say bye-bye to obviously the sponsors at Red Bull and anyone else?
No, I love that we have Red Bull as a sponsor. I wasn't aware of that. Okay. Our financial problems are sorted. That's good.
No, I like it. I mean, the persons who are then hearing this, listening to this podcast, of course, they don't know what time it is. Today is a bank holiday in Germany. So for this time of the day, my head is spinning already a lot. So I really love this conversation, and getting back to all the points that we touched today. It's very, this kind of adoptional thinking is what I think is making the time and makes value also in the time where we live in, which I like a lot, because I think I'm not 21 anymore, but I've never learned as much as I'm doing now, and also accepting different point of views and barriers and learning with this especially.
So thank you for the opportunity to join you guys. And as you said, Victoria, I'm glad, yes, that we got to know each other too. So thank you.
Perfect. We paid her to say that. No, honestly, it's been, I'll speak for myself, but it's been an absolute pleasure today chatting, and I sincerely hope you'll come and chat with us again and we can carry on the conversation, because it's been, as Nicolas said, like, my head is spinning with ideas. So yeah, thank you so much from me.
And for me, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.